My name is Corey Shapiro, and I'm a divorce attorney in New York City. I invite you to listen to my conversation with child-focused divorce proponent, Sarah Armstrong, who authored The Mom's Guide to a Good Divorce, What to Think Through When Children Are Involved, which is based primarily on her experiences going through a collaborative divorce over a decade ago in the state of Georgia when her daughter, Grace, I believe was about 7 years old. To be clear, she is a proponent of lifelong marriage. She comes from a grounded childhood. Her parents reached that golden anniversary over 50 years. But sometimes, as we all know, like in health, things are outside of our control. And divorce is a difficult time for anyone. But this thoughtful person knew when you're going through divorce trauma, it's too much to read a book. Who can do it? So she made this guide. It's bite-sized. It's easy to digest. Last year, she wrote a letter to the New York Times, which was published. Congratulations on that. It has been my mission. This is from that letter. It's been my mission since my own divorce 12 years ago to promote the concept of a good divorce. One that makes co-parenting the pinnacle achievement for couples who must go through this difficult change. A good divorce means attending parent-teacher conferences with your ex, helping your child select a birthday gift for your ex-spouse, and relying on family and friends whenever possible to help ease this difficult transition. She also quotes her beloved daughter, Grace, who I believe now is in college, who gave her the working definition of a good divorce when she was 8. Talk about a beginner's mind. It says a good divorce is when parents are nice to each other like you and daddy. So welcome, Sarah. Thank you for coming on this conversation.
Corey, thank you so much for having me.
You know, what I like about what you're doing, and I guess a lot of people don't do this. I mean, you have high-level project management skills. You have a high analytical mind, and you went through a difficult time, and you sort of looked at it like probably one of your big projects, probably the biggest project you've ever done, but you did it the right way. My question for you is, why do we limit it only to mothers? Because when I read it, I was like, a lot of these things seem to apply to parents who are active and nurturing and what we think of mothers. But why is it not a parent's guide to a good divorce? Why only a mother's guide?
Completely fair question. You know, I wrote the book based on my experience, to your point, and the discussions I'd had with a number of my girlfriends who at a given time came to me and said, I'd really like some help thinking through this. I've decided that we're going to go through a divorce. And so it was really capturing those discussions and those bits of guidance and advice that I gave to my girlfriends. And so that's why I really focused it on the Mom's Guide and really these conversations that we had over the course of years. Now, having said that, when I did share it with, honestly, both my father and other men that have gone through this, they read it and said, I get a lot out of this book. So I appreciate that I focused on moms, but I do think there's benefit for men or women that are going through this.
Good to hear. Maybe for a version 3, that would be my advice for version 3. Okay. But, you know, I've seen some divorce attorneys, maybe some therapists, but I see some divorce attorneys who write both perspectives. Probably hard to write the other's perspective now. All right. One thing I saw, which I was like, this is amazing. Your ex sent you a Mother's Day card. I mean, talk about the pinnacle. Like, as an attorney, if an opposing counsel sends me a case, if an opposing spouse, the opposing client sends me a case, I'm doing something right. Well, hopefully. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? And the question I thought of is, did you ever send him a Father's Day card?
Great question. So the Mother's Day card actually came to me 5 years after the divorce. And in fairness, we did give each other cards over the years for Mother's Day and Father's Day. But this specific one that you're referring to just really reflected on the approach I was taking to parenting Grace from a mom's perspective. And he was really recognizing that and saying that we also really were always on the same page. And he really appreciated the fact that that was the case. So it was just a moment in time, 5 years post-divorce, That I felt like, gosh, if Grace can call it a good divorce at age 8, a year after a divorce, and my ex-husband can, in a Mother's Day card, recognize how we are trying to do this together, that I felt like we're doing something quote unquote right. I use that in air quotes, but we were on the right path.
On the right path. I mean, that's amazing. That's like, I would say top 5, maybe even top 3%. It's ridiculous. That's the goal. Anyone listening to this, I know we're talking about getting a divorce without losing your mind. You know, you might be having a divorce with someone who's very difficult. You can't control that. You can only control what's in your, what you could control. And if you can act this way, even when the person's a little difficult, I mean, that's just so helpful for your child who doesn't have to go through your trauma as a child, without the resources you have as an adult. Okay, one thing's a little different for me. I live in New York City. Things are a little different here. I think you were living in Atlanta at that time?
I was, yes.
Okay, so Atlanta is a city, but not New York City. And you're a woman, I'm a man. So tell me about this stigma. Because when I read it, I was like, I didn't realize there was really a stigma. But when I talked to a few people about it, especially women, from the women's perspective, there seems to be a stigma. Now, I know you had a divorce a little bit ago, over a decade ago.
Yeah.
Do you still feel there's a stigma for the people you talk to as you promote this work?
It's interesting. Yeah, I actually do. I do think there's a stigma in being divorced. I do think there's a bit of a scarlet letter that you wear as a divorced individual. And, it can come about or be highlighted in certain ways. One of the things recently that I had, and it sounds funny, but I went to get my teeth cleaned at the dentist. I went to my annual dentist appointment, and the questions on the form were like, are you single, married, divorced, other? I'm like, why does it matter if I'm divorced? I'm getting my teeth cleaned. Like, what? Why does it matter?
Right.
Why does it matter? So I think that the label of, getting divorced is an action. You get divorced. But in society, it's a label that you then wear, and you wear everywhere you go. And it's going to come up maybe in conversation or in some aspect of your life on any given day, any given week, which is fine. But it's the challenge is, you said it earlier when you said that my ex-husband and I were maybe in the top 1 or 3% of divorces. If it's as common as it is, and if so many people are going to go through this, A, why is it such a stigma? And B, why is it so rare that we couldn't do it well? Because you have a whole life after you get divorced. And I don't think the negativity of the action of getting divorced, which is not something anyone wants to go through, right? But if you're going to go through it, why is there this negative cloud that has to follow you and your children and your ex-spouse for the rest of their lives because you've gone through divorce? I don't buy into it. I don't buy into that that's the way it needs to be. And so I just don't think there's enough conversation in society about the concept of a good divorce and of the fact that a good divorce is an attainable outcome. Because one of the things, Corey, you and I've talked about is, no one gets married to get divorced, and no one gets divorced generally for positive reasons. There's been a trigger, there's something that's happened, or there's a reason. But, children don't get to decide that their parents are going to go through this divorce.
Right, they're the victims.
They're the victims. They're the most fundamentally impacted by this decision. And I think we owe it to them. As parents, we bring our kids into the world and we want to raise them in the healthiest, happiest, safest environment possible. I mean, that's the whole goal, right? And I talk about, you cover the plugs, you put bike helmets on them, you feed them organic milk, you do all these things. You literally jump through hoops every day to make sure your kids are safe and happy and healthy. And then when you go through divorce, you potentially put them in a toxic environment, depending on how you're handling it, and you let them sit there, literally, for days, months, years. And that toxic environment has massive impact on these kids in terms of their view on marriage, their view on relationships, their own, self-perception of themselves, of their parents. And I look at that, I'm like, why do we think that's okay? Why as a society do we think it's okay to raise our kids and say, oh no, stay in this toxic environment. It's going to be good for you. There's nothing good about it. There's nothing good about it.
Yeah, no, I saw this good article by a judge that said, the job of a parent is to ensure happy memories, happy childhood. That's your job. And how the hell is having a divorce for years in the court system where you're fighting over time, other issues, or even in a co-parenting situation like you and being petty, how is that helpful? How is that creating a happy childhood? It's not, it's hurting children. It's delaying their growth. So all hats to you and your ex for putting your child first. And, with respect to the stigma, when I was reading this, I was like, well, okay, I had to see where you were. So I first learned that you were from Atlanta, but I was like, that's not enough. I didn't know where you were raised. So I saw that you lived or grew up outside of Detroit, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what I was thinking, and I could be wrong, I'm just telling you what I'm thinking. When I hear Detroit, I saw you have 2 brothers, so you have 3 kids.
Yep.
Did you come from a traditional family where your mother was the primary caretaker and your dad was the primary moneymaker? Okay,
Yes.
so we have a traditional family outside of Detroit. But I looked at you and, one other thing. Did your dad used to have a long-term job?
Yes, very much. Very successful.
Yeah, okay, so that's what I saw. So in his generation, that was standard. And then I looked at yours and you had many different jobs, all at high levels. And so many people who are in the corporate world bounce around, and it's not a bad thing. But back in the day, I bet at your dad's level, if you bounce around, it might have been a scarlet letter. I don't have as much experience in that area, but it does seem in your area, it's rewarded sometimes to move around. And there's not much stigma to move around. Is that right?
Right. That's right. There's not a stigma. And I think going back to the stigma reflections, I grew up, my parents have been married now 55 years. I mean, we're celebrating the 55th anniversary. It's amazing. And they're honestly a true picture of partnership and just this amazing marriage. But I watched a lot of ugly divorces growing up. Their friends that got divorced and they were really ugly. And so the stigma and the perception of divorce was rooted in me very young, that it is a negative thing.
Oh, wow.
That it is. So I grew up with that perspective. And when it presented itself that in my adult life that I was potentially going to have to go down this journey, that's what caused me to pause and have a conversation with my ex-husband that if we were going to go down this path, I wanted to do it differently than what I'd watched growing up. And I said, I have to believe there's a better way. I have to believe there is. And so that's what really drove a lot of the actions and the decisions. And one thing, Corey, I want to say, because it's really important, that it requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of taking the high road when the high road looks really steep and it might be tough to do. It's not easy, but it is doable. And for our kids and for the sake of our kids, it is worth the effort to do that. Now, again, it's not a perfect journey. There's lots of, twists and turns in the road, but it's so worth it. And that's one of the things that's why I want to fight against the stigma out there that, when you go through divorce, it has to be bad. It has to be negative. You're going to carry a scarlet letter and this negative cloud's going to follow you.
Yeah. So whoever's out there who's thinking about divorce, I get so many people who are on the fence. If you're in a toxic relationship, a toxic marriage, and you're thinking let's stay in the marriage for the benefit of the children, that's not what the research shows. The kids are smart. They pick up on stress. And this whole stigma that maybe in other parts of the country there is, really work those issues through, because really what you're trying to do is show a child, you're modeling for the child the type of relationship they should have. So if you're in a toxic relationship, that's what you're modeling for them. And you want them to be adjusted. So that's really what you have to work on if you're going through this. Okay, you said it was tough. I appreciate you saying this. You did it. I understand it's tough, but you came down to our normal level that you're just a human and you had a reaction. You say divorce was a surprise to you. It doesn't seem to be necessarily your decision. I think in your guide, you talk about the work you've done. So the question I have is, how long did it take you, someone who's had these seeds early in childhood where you saw it was bad, to move from that reactive state where you're having this major life change, this traumatic experience, to really think of it more as like a project, and you're going to try to put your best side forward to achieve a long-term divorce objective?
Well, my ex-husband and I arrived on this decision together, but it took us some time to make that decision, in fairness to your point. And so with that, I had some time to process that we were going to go down this path. And when we did finally decide to do it, and to say we are going to do this, I did tackle it like a project. It's exactly the mindset that I approached it with. And I said to the lawyer, in fairness, that I was going to be specifically working within our collaborative process, that this would be one of the quicker divorces she'd seen, because we were trying to be on as much of the same page as possible for Grace, because that was our focus. And we were going to try to work through any of those things that we were debating. But I did not want to belabor and draw out this process that I felt at the end of the day wasn't going to be healthy for all of us to stay in for too long. So we tried to move through it at a pace. And again, I know every divorce is different and all the parameters of what you have to think through and there's so much. But we did decide very consciously that we were going to try to make the decisions as expeditiously as possible in a productive way, and keep grace in view every step of the way with every one of those decisions, and then try to get through it so we could both move on and that Grace could live this new life that we were creating for her that was going to be very different than the life she led, but in the most positive way that we could.
That's great. So just to give a sense, I want to give something concrete so people can feel this, because, you have this reaction, which is this event that you're considering divorce. Is it 3 months? Is it 1 month? Is it 1 year until you both decided that you're going to move in this more collaborative framework?
It was over the course. The discussions of leading to that were probably over the course of a year. And then from the time we decided to the time we're divorced was 6 months.
6 months?
Mm-hmm. From saying we're getting divorced to us literally being officially divorced. Now, I had gone through therapy over the years, to be clear. That there's, as you said, there's lots of work going on both sides to work through things in life. So there were multiple years of therapy and thinking through things, but the conversation of heading down a path was in that time frame.
Okay, just to be clear, so because the research shows, I believe, that it takes 2 years. I always tell people this takes 2 years to grieve fully. Everyone's a little different. But that's that's the stages. And you can go to grief.com and check it out. Very interesting. And what's so hard, it seems, about these divorces, or anytime you have to make a decision before you fully grieved, is you're in that reactive state. Mm-hmm. And it's so important, the professionals, if you are going to reach out to professionals to use. And I was very surprised that you used the collaborative divorce model. I don't even think most of the people listening to this even know what that means. Right. So first of all, what is the collaborative divorce model, and how did you learn about it over a decade ago?
Yeah, no, it's great. So we were definitely kind of on the early adoption of that model. So what a collaborative divorce model is it basically focuses discussions about what is going to be best for your children. And so each individual, the two spouses, each have a coach, okay? And those coaches walk through all the decisions you're going to have to make for your child and think through them. And you both talk individually with your coach, and then you talk together and say, are we making aligned decisions that are in the best interest of our child? So that's the first step. The reason you do that is by the time you get to the two lawyers that are in the collaborative divorce process, all those decisions have been made, and they're shared with lawyers. Say, this is what this couple has decided on behalf of their child. Here's the parenting plan, here are the details. And then there's two other important pieces of the puzzle. One is a financial neutral who comes in and looks at finances and has everything in view. And then a child specialist who focuses on the child and meets with your child, meets with you and then your child, and works with them throughout the process. So it's a team-based approach. Now, some people might say, wow, that sounds like a lot of people and very expensive. I have to tell you, I think it is about efficient as possible, because when you're working with those coaches, you're not paying, in fairness, lawyers' fees, you're paying coaching fees. And you are working through things, in a pretty structured way. Now, some people will say, well, I don't have a willing participant on the other side. Then, quite honestly, collaborative is not going to work. You have to have two people that are willing to have conversations with a coach, and then as a joint team to make decisions that are best for your children. We were early adopters. In fairness, I had it recommended to me as a potential because of the situation and because they thought we would be the type of couple that could go through this. And I'm a big believer that it allowed us to go through relatively quickly in the grand scope of divorce processes. And we worked through a lot. It's not that we were aligned on many things, but there's things we had to discuss and debate, and we worked through through that process. And that parenting plan, by the way, was written from the time Grace was 7 through college. So, and she's a sophomore now, so we have 2 more years. But it basically outlines all those decisions you have to make about, are you going to handle college tuition? Are you going to buy them a car? Is it new or used? Who's paying the insurance? All those decisions that you could be debating along this journey of raising your children are outlined. And it sounds overwhelming to think about them, but it's actually incredibly liberating once you have that all written down and it's decided. then you can focus on raising your children in the healthiest way possible.
That's exactly what you spend a lot of time in your guide going over these issues, and you go over it in a way that you can, I suggest the Audible, you could just listen to it a little bit here and there. You don't have to listen to all the different chapters. We're talking about these chapters are less than a minute, 2 minutes, most of them. And it's literally some, person who's been there, been through it, just helping you through what you did in the collaborative model. And then when you get, maybe a further along in the process, then you could go maybe to a professional and really deep dive. But this is going to be a great start to get you in the right mindset, as opposed to being in that reactive mindset. That's, I think, what I'm so impressed with what you and your ex did. So let me ask you a little bit about even finding a collaborative attorney, because I looked, and I don't know if this is true, I'm just telling you what I looked at.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at the national, or they call it the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, which is the national organization, maybe even international, I guess, for all the collaborative professionals. And each state has their own. So like New York would have their own. I'm assuming Georgia has their own.
Yep.
I looked on the International Academy. So this is the International Academy. There's only nine attorneys. Not even, I'm sorry, there might not even be attorneys. It might just be professionals. They could be financial professionals who are in this organization. They don't have to only be attorneys. They could be, child specialists, but there's just 9 of them in the state of Georgia now. So I couldn't imagine what it was like. So when you get that great referral from that trusted advisor, which you had a trusted advisor, put you in the right situation. But if you're in a state and you're thinking about a collaborative divorce and you're like, how do I even find one? Check out this International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, and it might be right. It might not be right. When I was thinking about you guys, I was like, well, you seem pretty on the same page. We're putting our child first. What was the reason you just didn't do, let's say, mediation or even just a traditional negotiated divorce?
It's a fair question. I was intrigued by the process. I'd heard good things about it. And I thought, for our situation and for what I felt we needed to work through, I thought it was the right thing for us. So I just was willing to try it. I think, in fairness, because of our approach, could we have just gone through mediation potentially? But I did think there was going to be some points that we needed to really think through, and that the collaborative approach would help us get through those points.
Right. So, for people who are we're focusing today really on the child issues. There really wasn't any financial issues, it seemed, or that's not the focus on this book, obviously, or on this guide. But you could just reach out. That's what I tell people. When people call me who are collaborative like this, I was like, go to a child specialist. There are people out there who have deep skill set in this area. You could go get some checklists, you can get some information, and anything you want to really create, want to think long-term like you did, Sarah, that's who you speak to. You don't need to speak to your divorce attorney at a high hourly rate. And if you think collaborative is like, oh my God, all these people, all these professionals, I don't have the money for that. I will say they're moving, and I don't think they had it back when you did it. They're moving to a streamline collaborative, which is sort of maybe a flat fee approach or a little less expensive, or you can do piecemeal. And obviously the most important thing is the child. So reach out to these child specialists. They'll talk to you. They'll help you.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to really make clear. All right. So you spend a lot of time in your guide, as I said, talking about parenting plans, which you defined. I don't even think a lot of people even understand what a parenting plan is. And I want you to explain in a little bit more detail if you can, but also, was there one parenting plan idea? Because now you've been doing this for so long that you found to be effective over the years, that you really are put it at the top of the list of what people should be thinking about when they're just thinking about parenting plans?
Well, the parenting plan really is helping us in the decision-making process. And there's a couple of things that it outlines right at the front. First, it says who is the primary decision maker on kind of the day-to-day major decisions in your children's lives. And then it talks about who's the primary decision maker on healthcare, and education, and religion, and extracurricular activities, like the things that you have to that make up a child's life. So it helps to get really clear that there's someone that's going to make that decision, and then there's someone that will support it. And so that's the first thing. It's just the structure it gives to the decisions. And then it goes through scheduling, which, again, there's so many different ways to approach scheduling, but getting clear writing it down. You can always have flexibility, but it's really important to write down the intent of the schedule. And honestly, your children deserve to have that be as consistent as possible, because that then becomes, quite honestly, it's the cadence of their life, even more than it's the cadence of your life. Like, where are they sleeping on any given night? So I think the scheduling is important. How you handle holidays and summer vacations. Again, holidays want to be one of the toughest things, I'd say, of being a divorced person. Mother, father, child, like it is so hard. And so I think that is one of the things you have to get really clear on. And then,
yeah, I liked your idea of traveling. That was smart. I know you travel for your job. You've been to it sounds like 55 countries. Delta must love you if you fly Delta, which
I'm one of the top flyers. I'm one of the top flyers in Delta. Yep.
Yeah. I just wanted to know if you ever got bumped, because you probably have so many miles. They probably would never bump you. They always, see, they bump me for people like you.
Exactly.
So, all right. So I really believe this idea of having a default, that you could have an informal parenting plan. If you're just, why do I even have to do anything? We'll just separate. We don't even get divorced. We'll just be cooperative. The parenting plan idea is, who knows what's going to happen in the future? And let's be on the same page. And that's the idea. So I'm really happy you spent the resources, you spoke to a professional. And for people who are out there just starting this process, if you're in that traumatic phase, I really suggest this is a great first start. This is a great first start, because you can't process so much.
Yeah.
You can't process so much. It just has to be seeds.
Yeah.
Almost like you, Sarah, when you saw as a child that your friends or people you knew were going through a divorce, and you knew as a child that was a bad thing. And then later on, as it developed, you had that ability to pause from the reaction to your response. And then you became the project manager that I think you are in the corporate world to get things done in the right way.
Yeah. And one thing I'd say about the book, Corey, that you've highlighted is it is written in, so when I got divorced, people gave me books actually, and they were dense.
Right.
Quite honestly, they were thick, and I would open them and I'd close them like, I can't read that right now. There's so much coming at me. I can't even fathom, these books. They were too much. And so when I decided to write this book, I wanted to write it in those bite-sized pieces of guidance, and as you mentioned, it's a topic per page, and it might go to 2 pages, but it might even just be a paragraph. And it's not meant to be read cover to cover, because there's so much you're having to think through it. It's like, what do you need to take in right now and process? And it's broken out in the 3 phases of preparing for the change, during the change, and post the change. And so, wherever you are in your process, your thought process, or either thinking about it or in the midst of it, hopefully there's some bite-sized pieces in there that you can just take and reflect on in terms of where you are in the thinking.
Yeah, well, listen, Sarah, I really appreciate you taking the time today to speak to me. I appreciate you taking the time out of your corporate work and away from your family, which I know is super important to you. You're really giving a gift back to people, destigmatizing the process, giving a guide that is so useful, especially in that first few stages where all of the important decisions are made. It's right there. It's hard to go from reactive and saying something nasty to being cooperative. Everything has to be thought of long-term, and this is a great first step. So I really thank you again for taking the time and doing this great work. I do suggest everyone, I read it. I also listened to the Audible. I like the Audible. I think it's nice. It's like a private premium podcast. You don't have to listen to any advertising, any fluff. She just gets right to it. Okay. And I did buy the book as well, and I read it, and then you just keep on looking at it. It's not something you're necessarily going to only look at once, I would say. I think it's something you can look at a few times and then have a different perspective once you go through that grieving process and you get more focused on the practicalities of what really lies ahead.
Thank you so much. And just to mention, there's an ebook, iBook version as well for those that don't want to have that book sitting on their bedside table, or you can also take a look at electronically if needed. But thank you so much for having me. And I just hope that those that are out there listening can go down this path and believe that a good divorce is an attainable outcome, because I truly believe it is.